There was a time when the word hero meant something sacred. It wasn't a hashtag, a slogan, or a holiday. It was a burden. To be called a hero was to carry the weight of a world that refused to listen. They stood where others trembled. They spoke when silence was safer. They lost everything, and somehow that loss became our inheritance. But somewhere along the line, something changed. We built statues instead of stories. We recited names instead of lessons. We turned their courage into decoration. And the message they died for faded behind marble, stone, and screens. Every civilization has done this. The Greeks had their philosophers. The Romans their warriors. Every nation, every culture, every faith has carved its legends in stone. And every one of them, in time, forgot what those legends truly meant. Because remembering a hero is easy. Becoming one is not. We look at the past and imagine that courage is something extraordinary, something that belongs to saints, to kings, to prophets. We forget that they were just as human as us. They too had doubts. They too were afraid. They too questioned whether what they were doing would even matter. Socrates questioned truth until they made him drink poison. Galileo dared to look through glass, and they silenced him for seeing too much. Gandhi walked barefoot toward empire and found freedom waiting in his hunger. Malcolm X spoke of equality, and bullets answered him. These were not superhumans. They were ordinary people who refused to be comfortable in an unjust world. But comfort, that is our greatest idol now. We build it, protect it, and worship it. It shields us from pain, yes, but also from growth, from truth, from the lessons our heroes bled to teach. They told us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the act of walking through it. They told us that love, compassion, and justice are not beliefs. They are disciplines. And yet, generation after generation, we choose convenience over conviction. We speak their words, but we do not live their meaning. Why? Why do we not learn? Perhaps because learning means admitting that we are still lost. It means looking into the mirror of history and seeing not the villains of the past, but the reflection of ourselves. The same greed that built empires still builds corporations. The same hatred that fueled wars still divides neighbors. The same hunger for power, for recognition, for control, still rules the hearts of men. We are not separate from history. We are its continuation. Every decision we make is a thread in the same ancient fabric, woven by those who came before us, and cut short by those who forgot. Heroes are not born in comfort. They are born in crisis. And crisis, it seems, is the only language humanity understands. We wait for disaster to rediscover our morality. We wait for loss to remember gratitude. We wait for pain to remember empathy. We forget that these virtues are not seasonal. They are the core of what it means to be human. When the fires of war burn, we rediscover peace. When the earth shakes, we rediscover unity. But when the world grows quiet again, we forget, and the silence becomes our greatest enemy. History is not a story of progress. It is a cycle, a spiral of pride and collapse, ignorance and rediscovery. Every empire thought itself eternal. Every generation believed it was wiser than the last. And every one of them fell, not because of their enemies, but because they forgot the lessons of their own heroes. We celebrate progress, but we rarely ask what we've truly learned. We call ourselves modern, yet our hearts still kneel before the same old idols: wealth, vanity, power, belonging. We invent miracles of technology, but not of conscience. We explore the stars, but not our own hearts. And so, the voices of the past echo across time. Soft, fading, almost forgotten. They whisper, not with anger, but with sorrow, "We warned you. We showed you. We lived and died, so you would not have to." But humanity, ever distracted, ever proud, moves forward with blinders on chasing comfort, entertainment, and validation. We scroll past wisdom as if it were noise. We quote heroes for motivation, not transformation. And in doing so, we become exactly what they try to save us from. We think history is a book we can close. But history is a mirror and the reflection never stops looking back. There are people alive today who will be called heroes one day. They will rise in moments of injustice, speak when others hide, give when others take. And like those before them, they will be ignored, resisted, even destroyed. Because truth is never welcome in the age of comfort. It demands too much. But the truth does not vanish, it waits. It waits in the silence of conscience. It waits in the stories we refuse to tell. It waits for the next generation willing to listen. You see, the lesson of a hero is not to worship them. It is to understand them, to see their flaws, their doubts, their humanity, and to realize that we are no different. Every one of us carries the same potential to stand up, to speak, to change something. We just keep convincing ourselves that someone else will do it. That is how history repeats, not through ignorance, but through hesitation. Every hero was once someone who stopped hesitating. They faced the same fear you feel right now, the fear of being alone in your belief, the fear of being mocked, the fear of losing. But they acted anyway. That is the only difference. Perhaps that is the first lesson we fail to learn, that waiting for courage to arrive is how courage dies. The world does not need more statues. It needs successors. It needs those who will take the torch instead of admiring it from afar. Because one day this generation will also be judged. One day we will be the past. And those who come after us will look at our choices and ask the same question we ask of those before us. Why didn't they listen? And in that moment, our silence will be the answer. We live in an age of symbols. Every wall, every screen, every speech carries them. Flags that once stood for sacrifice now wave over shopping malls. Quotes that once shook empires now decorate coffee mugs. We were the faces of our heroes on shirts, but we rarely wear their courage on our hearts. Somewhere, in our hunger to remember, we forgot why they mattered. We turned meaning into marketing. We traded substance for symbol. The symbol is powerful because it feels like truth without demanding change. It lets us belong without having to become. It allows us to admire bravery without the inconvenience of acting brave ourselves. When Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed, his dream was dangerous. It challenged comfort. It threatened systems. But today, the dream is printed on posters, sung in commercials, repeated by politicians who would have once opposed him. His image survived, but his challenge was defanged. That is the curse of every symbol that replaces sincerity. We do this because symbols are safe. They do not question us. They do not demand we look inward. They let us stand near greatness while remaining unchanged by it. It is easier to honor the memory of courage than to embody it. Every society tells itself that it has learned from the past. But what it really means is that it has learned how to disguise the same old mistakes with prettier slogans. The sword becomes the speech. The empire becomes the economy. The idol changes shape, but the worship stays the same. We say we celebrate freedom, but we fear dissent. We speak of unity, but we divide ourselves by every possible label. We praise honesty, but punish those who tell uncomfortable truths. We honor justice, but close our eyes when it demands cost. And so, the words of our heroes become hollow. The lessons become folklore. The flame becomes a logo. We have learned how to look inspired without being transformed. This is the age of performance. An age where emotion can be sold and conviction can be streamed. Where movements rise and fall in algorithmic cycles. Where activism becomes a trend and moral outrage lasts until the next distraction. It is the age where we signal virtue instead of living it. In this age, a hero's greatest danger is not being forgotten. It is being simplified. Stripped of complexity, they are turned into caricatures that fit neatly into hashtags and history books. We prefer our heroes perfect, unblemished, easy to admire. But the truth is that their flaws were part of their strength. Their humanity was the source of their wisdom. When we remove the struggle, we remove the lesson. This is how societies lose their soul. Slowly, politely, with good intentions and blind hearts. We do not erase our heroes. We neutralize them. We cover them in flowers so we don't have to face the thorns. Every revolution begins as a whisper, then becomes a song, and finally, an advertisement. And in that transformation, the spirit fades. Because transformation requires friction, and friction is uncomfortable. Symbols smooth the edges. They make the unbearable bearable, the impossible easy to ignore. The truth, though, remains. A symbol without action is a lie we tell ourselves to feel righteous. We raise statues to silence guilt. We quote prophets to hide our apathy. We post slogans to prove we care. But caring is not clicking. It is committing. The greatest irony of our age is that we know more, see more, and remember less. We archive everything, yet understand nothing deeply. The flood of images and icons drowns the message beneath. The hero's words have become wallpaper, visible but unread. Why do we cling to symbols then? Because they give us identity in a time of confusion. They make us feel connected to something larger. But connection without comprehension is a chain, not a bridge. We become prisoners of our own nostalgia. The age of symbols is seductive because it replaces effort with emotion. We feel good for caring, even if nothing changes. We mistake attention for empathy, applause for awareness. But the true measure of remembrance is not what we display. It is what we do when no one is watching. Imagine if our heroes could see us now. Would they recognize the world they fought for? Would they smile at our progress or weep at our complacency? Would they see their names used to justify the very systems they once opposed? History suggests they would not be surprised, because they understood human nature too well. They knew that every movement begins pure and ends convenient. That is why they warned us, not just about oppression, but about forgetfulness. They knew that symbols, unchecked, can become prisons. We build monuments not to remember, but to move on, to convince ourselves that the past has been settled. But the past is never settled. It sleeps lightly, waiting to be reawakened. And every time we use a symbol to avoid responsibility, we shake it awake. The lesson of this age is simple, but brutal. If you want to honor your heroes, stop worshiping them. Live what they live for. Fight what they fought against. Carry their spirit, not their signature. Because courage does not live in statues. It lives in choices. And choices are made, not carved. The age of symbols can end only when we remember what symbols were meant to serve. Truth, sacrifice, compassion, and change. Not image, not comfort, not applause. The truth is heavier than marble. It cannot be lifted by ceremony. It must be carried in silence, every day, by those who still believe that the lessons of the past are not relics, but responsibilities. And until we do that, we will remain surrounded by symbols, drowning in meaning, starving for purpose. Memory is a strange thing. We think of it as truth, but it is really preference. We remember what comforts us and forget what confronts us. We polish the stories that make us feel noble and bury the ones that demand we change. Civilizations, like people, curate their memories. They choose the parts of history that flatter them. They highlight the victories, the ideals, the glory. They fade out the cruelty, the contradictions, the cost. And so, memory becomes not a mirror, but a stage. A performance of who we wish we were, rather than who we are. We remember our heroes, yes, but only the parts that make us proud. We recite their words of peace, not their warnings of struggle. We celebrate their triumphs, not their doubts. We preserve their faces, not their fire. This is the paradox of memory. To remember selectively is to forget completely. When a nation, a generation, or a person remembers only the convenient truth, the inconvenient truth grows stronger in silence. It waits, it festers, it returns. And when it does, we call it fate. But it was never fate, it was amnesia. Look closely at any historical cycle, and you will see it. The same greed wearing new clothes. The same arrogance with a different anthem. The same ignorance with a shinier device. Our progress is technical, not moral. We build taller buildings, faster machines, smarter algorithms, but we have not built better hearts. The architecture of compassion remains underdeveloped. The engineering of empathy remains forgotten. Memory should be a teacher, but we have turned it into a museum. We walk through it quietly, reverently, and leave unchanged. We speak of the past with nostalgia, not accountability, as if wisdom were a souvenir, not a discipline. Our heroes left us not just their victories, but their warnings. Every one of them said the same thing in their own way. Do not let this happen again. Yet here we are, living sequels to tragedies we swore were over. Because memory, without meaning, becomes ritual. We remember dates, we hold parades, we light candles. Beautiful gestures that require no transformation. They make us feel righteous, even as we repeat the same mistakes. The problem is not that we forget the past. It's that we refuse to let it change us. We treat remembrance as a ceremony, not a responsibility. And so, we inherit the same pain dressed in modern clothes. History offers us mirrors, but we keep asking for windows. We want to look out, not in. We want to see others' failures, not our own reflection in them. That is why humanity keeps stumbling over the same stones. Because every generation says, we are different. Every generation believes it has transcended the darkness of those before. But darkness does not disappear, it adapts. It speaks the language of its time. And those who do not study the translation mistake it for light. We teach our children simplified histories, edited for comfort. We remove the blood, the doubt, the moral anguish. We want them to admire the past, not to feel its weight. But admiration without understanding is idolatry. And idolatry is the enemy of growth. To remember well is not to glorify, it is to grieve. It is to look at what was broken and admit that it can break again. It is to understand that the same seeds of cruelty, ignorance, and indifference still live in the soil of the present. We are not spectators to history. We are its continuation. There's a reason every era believes its problems are unique. It is easier to think we are pioneers of pain than heirs of it. But the truth is humbling. We are living in reruns of human nature. The faces change, the tools evolve, the stage expands, but the script remains eerily familiar. Why does this pattern persist? Because remembering the lesson demands humility, and humility is the one thing we consistently refuse. We love the image of progress more than the practice of it. We want evolution without reflection, improvement without discomfort. But growth is not comfortable. It never has been. Our heroes understood that. They faced the storms of their time, not because they enjoyed the struggle, but because they knew that silence feeds the storm. They saw clearly what we choose to blur, that the future is never safe from the past. It is built upon it. When we forget that, history becomes a shadow that lengthens behind us, growing larger the further we run. We can never outrun what we refuse to face. Consider how quickly empathy fades after tragedy. When disaster strikes, the world unites. We donate, we march, we weep. But as soon as the news cycle moves on, so do we. Our memory has the lifespan of attention, not conscience. Heroes are born in such moments, when memory collapses and someone decides to remember for the rest of us. But we should not need heroes to remind us of our humanity. The very need for them is proof that we have learned nothing. What would it mean to truly remember? It would mean to let the past breathe inside us, to feel the pain of those before us until it shapes how we act now. It would mean teaching our children not just the names of the brave, but the cost of their bravery. It would mean seeing every injustice today as a repetition of an older one we never resolved. True memory is not nostalgia, it is responsibility. It is not comfort, it calls. It says, if you remember, then act. Otherwise, remembering is just sentimentality, beautiful, harmless, and empty. The paradox of memory is that it can either heal or hypnotize. It can either remind us of our strength or lull us into pride. The difference lies in how honestly we look at it. Do we remember our heroes to feel superior to the past, or to feel accountable for the future? Do we quote them to appear wise, or to continue their work? Do we honor their sacrifices by repeating their mistakes more politely? The choice is ours, as it always has been. And perhaps the hardest truth to face is this. We don't suffer from forgetfulness. We suffer from selective remembrance. We remember what flatters us and discard what convicts us. We remember the victories of our heroes, but not the responsibilities they handed us. And that is why history keeps returning. Not as punishment, but as invitation. Each time, it asks the same question. Will you finally remember what mattered? Because memory, real memory, is not what you hold in your mind. It is what you carry in your actions. We say that we know better now. We have books, archives, documentaries, entire libraries filled with warnings from the past. We teach history in schools. We name streets after the great and fallen. And yet, when the same tests return, we fail them in new ways. It is not ignorance that binds us. It is habit. We are creatures of pattern. We learn through repetition, but we also destroy through it. What we cannot transform, we unconsciously recreate. The mind is a storyteller, and every story it tells seeks comfort, not truth. That is why we keep repeating history, because it feels familiar, and the familiar feels safe, even when it hurts. There is an illusion buried deep in human nature, the belief that awareness alone is transformation. We think that because we know what went wrong before, we won't do it again. But awareness without discipline is just memory. It changes nothing. To truly learn from the past means to rewire the mind. And rewiring is painful work. It demands that we confront not the villains of history, but the shadows within ourselves. That's the part most of us avoid. It's easier to condemn an era than to examine a tendency. Every society repeats what it refuses to introspect. Every generation reenacts the conflicts it romanticizes. And every individual lives out the fears they never resolved. We blame the system, the times, the leaders. But systems are made of people, and times are shaped by their collective minds. If we do not change the inner world, the outer world will always reorganize itself into the same shape. Why do revolutions so often resemble the tyrannies they overthrow? Why do movements born in hope end in hierarchy? Why do we replace old idols with new ones, old fears with modern names? Because we try to build a new world with the same minds that built the old one. Our heroes were not merely rebels against injustice. They were rebels against inertia. They defied not just their oppressors, but their own conditioning. They understood that every empire, every cruelty, every blindness begins as a pattern of thought. And until that pattern is named and broken, it will return wearing a different crown. There is a rhythm to human folly. It beats in time with our ego, our pride, our fear of insignificance. We crave belonging so deeply that we will follow any chorus that sings our name loudly enough. We crave certainty so badly that we mistake repetition for stability. That is how propaganda works. That is how hate works. That is how the same story keeps being told by new actors who believe they are improvising. The mind resists change because change threatens its identity. If I admit that my beliefs, my culture, my heroes might be flawed, who am I then? So, we protect our illusions as if they were family heirlooms. We polish them. We defend them. We call that loyalty. But loyalty to illusion is betrayal of truth. And truth is what heroes die for. Repetition is seductive. It gives us the comfort of predictability. It tells us, you've seen this before, you know how it ends. But that is precisely how it traps us, by convincing us that history is inevitable, that the patterns cannot be broken. Heroes saw through that lie. They knew that progress is not a line, it is a spiral. It circles back again and again, testing whether we've evolved in understanding or only in technology. Every loop asks, have you changed or just advanced? To break repetition, one must do what is hardest, pause. Pause before reacting. Pause before judging. Pause before repeating what feels right just because it is familiar. That pause is where growth lives. The same rule applies to nations as it does to people. When a collective mind does not pause to reflect, it repeats its past as policy, as ideology, as war. Every war claims to be the last necessary one. Every generation swears it will not become its parents. Every leader promises to be different. But the psychology of repetition is stronger than promise. It feeds on our denial. The past is not dead, it is dormant. It sleeps in our habits, in our institutions, in our fears. And each time we fail to question them, we wake it up again. The most dangerous phrase in any language is, "That could never happen here," because it always can, and it always does, just wearing the fashion of the present. Our inability to learn is not a failure of intellect. It is a failure of humility. We believe progress means we are morally superior to those who came before. But technology does not evolve conscience. Comfort does not produce character. And convenience does not build courage. We live in an age where knowledge is infinite, but wisdom is optional. Where communication is instant, but understanding is rare. Where we document everything, yet reflect on almost nothing. This is the perfect environment for repetition to thrive, because speed kills introspection. The heroes of the past often lived in slow times. They had silence, solitude, struggle. It gave them space to think, to wrestle with truth. We have traded that silence for noise, that reflection for distraction. And distraction is the new forgetfulness. We scroll through the mistakes of the past as entertainment. We consume history like content, informative, emotional, fleeting. But the brain does not change through consumption. It changes through contemplation. And contemplation requires discomfort. To break the cycle, we must become uncomfortable with comfort itself. We must learn to sit with the unease of awareness until it transforms us. Only then does knowledge become wisdom. That is what our heroes try to teach us. Not to memorize their victories, but to internalize their discipline. Not to quote their words, but to inherit their courage. They were not exceptional beings. They were ordinary people who refused to repeat the ordinary patterns. If we wish to honor them, we must stop mistaking admiration for emulation. Because the real lesson is not how they lived, it's why we don't. We are trapped in repetition, not because history is doomed to recur, but because transformation is slower than memory. Our minds evolve at the speed of habit, not revelation. And so, until the inner world changes, the outer world will keep showing us the same test, again and again, until we finally pass it. The test is not external. It has never been. It is the test of awareness turned into action, of memory turned into moral evolution. And it begins with a single question whispered by time itself. How many times must you relive this before you finally learn?